I stood at my kitchen window, watching the winter light die behind the hills, when my son called to uninvite me from Christmas. Just like that. 23 years of hosting the family in this cramped rental, and Richard's voice was flat, polite, final. "Mom, Carla and I have decided to do something more intimate this year. Just us and Gabriel. You understand." The line went dead before I could answer. I stared at the phone, my reflection pale in the darkening glass, and something inside me, something I'd kept silent for decades, whispered that it was time. You don't expect your own child to measure your worth by the size of your house or the label on your purse, but Carla had been doing it for years. Those thin smiles at family dinners, the way she'd touch Richard's arm whenever I mentioned anything about my past. And Richard, my beautiful boy, had learned to look away. I could feel the shame radiating off him, the apology in his eyes every time his wife commented on my quaint furniture or my secondhand coat. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was imagining things. But when that phone call came, when he chose his wife's snobbery over his own mother, I realized I'd been living a lie, not just tolerating it, living it, and I was done. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, then stay with me. Subscribe to this channel. We're brand new here, and every day we're bringing you stories that matter, stories that dig beneath the surface, because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. My name is Margaret Chen, and for 69 years, I've been the master of blending in. Small apartment, modest clothes, a life so ordinary you'd never look twice. After my husband Daniel died 15 years ago, I moved to this town to be closer to Richard and his family. I worked part-time at the library, volunteered at the food bank, lived carefully. People assumed I was just another widow scraping by on a pension, and I let them assume. There were reasons, good reasons, but as I stood there with that dial tone buzzing in my ear, those reasons felt suddenly hollow. The apartment around me told the story I'd carefully constructed, faded floral curtains I'd bought at a yard sale, a couch with springs that protested whenever anyone sat down. The kitchen table wobbled unless you folded a piece of cardboard under one leg. I'd lived here for 12 years, in this ground floor unit that smelled faintly of the neighbor's cooking and the musty carpet that probably hadn't been replaced since the 80s. My car was a 15-year-old sedan with a dent in the passenger door. My winter coat came from Goodwill, and I'd sewn the loose button back on myself 3 times. This was the life Richard knew, the life Carla judged. Carla had always treated me like an embarrassment. At Gabriel's 8th birthday last spring, she'd pulled me aside in her gleaming kitchen, all marble and steel, a shrine to status, and said very sweetly, "Margaret, you know we adore you, but maybe next time you could wear something a little more current? Richard's colleagues will be here." I'd smiled, nodded, felt the old reflex kick in. Stay small, don't make waves. I'd worn my best dress, the navy one from the department store sale rack, and watched Carla introduce me to her friends with a pitying tone that made my role clear. I was the charity case, the humble beginning Richard had risen above. I remember standing in the corner of that birthday party, holding a paper plate with a slice of expensive cake I couldn't taste, watching Gabriel open presents, designer toys, the latest gadgets, things that cost more than my monthly rent. And when he opened my gift, a book, a beautiful illustrated edition of The Secret Garden I'd found at an estate sale, Carla's smile had been like ice. "How thoughtful," she'd said, in a voice that meant how cheap. Gabriel had loved it, though. He'd sat on my lap later, away from the noise, and asked me to read him the first chapter. That memory kept me warm through a lot of cold nights. And Richard. God, Richard. He'd stopped defending me years ago. Stopped inviting me to their bigger gatherings. Started calling less. When he did call, the conversations were brief, obligatory. "How are you, Mom?" "Fine, sweetheart. How's work?" "Busy. Listen, I've got to run." Click. I told myself he was busy, that careers demand sacrifice, that sons grow up and build their own lives. But deep down, I knew. He was ashamed of me. Or maybe he'd just absorbed Carla's values so completely that he couldn't see me anymore. Only the shabby optics, the modest grocery runs, the life that didn't sparkle. Last Thanksgiving, they'd invited me for dinner. I'd arrived early, hoping to help in the kitchen, and found Carla frantically rearranging the table settings. "Margaret," she'd said, not looking at me, Would you mind terribly sitting at the side table? We have some important guests, and the main table is just so crowded. The side table was in the hallway, barely visible from the dining room. I'd eaten my turkey there, alone, listening to the laughter from the other room, and told myself it was fine. I told myself a lot of things. That night, after the phone call, I made tea and sat at my tiny kitchen table. The wallpaper was peeling near the window. The faucet dripped, a steady rhythm I'd learned to sleep through. Outside, Christmas lights blinked on across the neighborhood, strings of color against the dark, and I thought about Daniel. He'd wanted me to live openly, to stop hiding. Maggie, he'd said in those final weeks, his hand thin in mine, his voice barely a whisper. Promise me you'll let yourself be seen. All of you. We didn't build what we built so you could live like a ghost. I'd promised. Then buried him, buried the promise, and kept shrinking. But something shifted in me that evening. Maybe it was the cold precision of Richard's rejection. Maybe it was turning 69 and realizing I'd spent decades apologizing for taking up space. Maybe it was the memory of Daniel's disappointment. The way he'd looked at me near the end, when I'd insisted we keep living simply. There's simple, he'd said. And then there's invisible. Don't confuse the two, Maggie. I pulled out my laptop, logged into the accounts I never mentioned to anyone, and started making calls. The numbers on the screen were staggering, even to me. Decades of smart investments, compounding interest, dividends from stocks I'd bought when they were pennies. Daniel and I had been good at this, better than good, and I'd hidden it all away like a shameful secret, pretending poverty was the same as virtue. Not anymore. By the end of the week, I'd purchased a $7 million mansion on the coast. Cash. No mortgage, no hesitation. The realtor, a sharp young woman named Lisa, kept glancing at me like I'd walked into the wrong showing. I was wearing my usual thrift store cardigan, the one with the small moth hole near the hem that I kept meaning to mend. My scuffed purse was slung over one shoulder, and I'd driven up in my dented sedan. Lisa's smile was professional but strained. "Mrs. Chen," she said carefully, as we stood in the marble foyer, "this property is quite substantial. The asking price is $7 million, and there are several other interested parties. Perhaps you'd like to see the price breakdown before we—" "I'll take it," I said. "As is." Her mouth opened, closed. A flush crept up her neck. "I'm sorry, did you say—" "I'll take it. I can have a cashier's check to you by tomorrow morning." The color drained from her face. She looked at me, really looked, and I watched her recalibrate everything she'd assumed. Of course, yes. I'll draw up the papers immediately." The next day, when I handed her the check, her hands trembled slightly. "Mrs. Chen, I have to ask, do you need any financing recommendations? A wealth manager?" "I have one, thank you," I said. "I've had one for 30 years. She nodded slowly, still processing. As I left her office, I heard her on the phone, her voice hushed and urgent. Word would spread. That was fine. Let it spread. The house was absurd. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. Waves that crashed and foamed against black rocks below. A chef's kitchen with 2 islands. Professional-grade appliances. Cabinet space that could hold provisions for a small army. 6 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. Walk-in closets bigger than my current bedroom. A library with built-in shelves that reached the 12-foot ceilings. A rolling ladder attached to brass rails. There was a media room, a gym, a wine cellar, a 3-car garage. Marble, hardwood, soft gray walls that caught the light like silk. The master suite had a balcony where you could watch the sunrise over the water, and I stood there during the walkthrough, feeling the salt wind on my face and thought, this is what freedom feels like. It was too much. It was exactly enough. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing, and felt something unfamiliar, defiance. And beneath that, something even stranger, joy. I'd spent my entire adult life managing wealth invisibly. Daniel and I had built a tech company in the early 90s, one of those scrappy startups that hit at exactly the right moment. We'd developed software for supply chain management, something boring and essential, and we'd been smart enough to sell before the dot-com bubble burst. The payout had been astronomical. We'd taken that money, invested carefully, diversified, watched it grow. We could have lived like kings. Mansions, cars, private jets, all of it. But Daniel came from nothing. His parents had been immigrants, worked in factories, lived paycheck to paycheck. He'd seen what money did to people, how it twisted relationships, bred entitlement, corroded values, how it made children weak, spoiled, disconnected from reality. So we'd agreed, live simply, give generously, raise Richard to understand the worth of work and humility. We'd kept our modest house, driven practical cars, dressed plainly. We'd given Richard a good education, but made him work for his spending money. We'd wanted him to build his own success, his own sense of accomplishment, without the distortion of inherited wealth. After Daniel died, I kept that promise. I funded scholarships anonymously, donated to hospitals and food banks under a family trust, lived on a fraction of what I had. I sent checks to cousins in need, paid for nieces' and nephews' college tuitions without fanfare. I helped elderly neighbors with their bills, left anonymous gifts on doorsteps at Christmas. Richard never knew. I wanted him to build his own life, his own success, without the weight or the distortion of wealth. But watching him become the kind of man who'd exclude his mother from Christmas because she didn't fit his wife's aesthetic, that broke something fundamental. I hired a cleaning service, a catering company, a decorator. Within 10 days, the mansion was transformed. A towering Christmas tree in the foyer, at least 15 feet tall, decorated with thousands of lights and ornaments in silver and gold. Garlands wound down the curved staircase, woven with white roses and eucalyptus. Soft gold lights were strung everywhere, catching the crystal chandelier, reflecting off the windows. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon, and something expensive I couldn't quite name. I sent invitations, real ones, heavy cardstock with embossed lettering, handwritten in fountain pen, to my siblings, my cousins, my nephew's family, my old college friends, people who'd stayed kind over the years, who'd never measured me by my square footage, or my car, or my clothes, people who'd invited me to their homes, who'd called just to check in, who'd remembered my birthday. The invitation was simple. Join me for Christmas at my new home. There's something I'd like to share. I didn't invite Richard and Carla. The responses came fast. Surprise, joy, confusion. My sister Helen called within an hour. Maggie, did you win the lottery? What is this address? I looked it up online and... Jesus, Maggie, what's going on? Just come, I said. Please. She laughed, bewildered, delighted. Of course we're coming. We wouldn't miss this for the world. My cousin Dow texted. Is this real? Did you marry a billionaire and not tell anyone? It's real, I wrote back. And I'll explain everything. I knew word would travel. Small town, smaller social circles. And I knew Richard would hear. That was fine. Let him hear. Let him drive by, see the lights, the cars in the driveway, the life I'd hidden. Let him wonder. 3 days before Christmas, Richard showed up at my old apartment. I was packing the last of my books, wrapping them in newspaper, and the knock startled me. When I opened the door, he looked stricken, pale, dark circles under his eyes. Mom, what the hell is going on? I stepped aside, let him in. He stared at the boxes, the stripped walls, the empty spaces where furniture had been. You're moving. Already moved, I said, just clearing out. Where? Why didn't you tell me? I kept my voice level, calm. You didn't seem interested in my life, Richard. You uninvited me from Christmas, remember? His jaw tightened. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood, when he was frustrated or scared. That wasn't... Carla thought I was an embarrassment, and you agreed. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? I folded a sweater, placed it carefully in a box. When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Not how I was managing, but really asked. When was the last time you came here just to visit, not out of obligation? Silence. He looked around the apartment, at the bare walls, the worn carpet. I thought you were okay. You never said, I've been more than okay, Richard. I've been wealthy for 30 years. The air in the room changed. He blinked, frowned, like he'd misheard. What? Your father and I built a company. We sold it in 1998 for $42 million. We invested. We grew that money. I've been a multimillionaire since before you graduated college. I've been sitting on a fortune while you and your wife pitied me. His face went slack, the blood draining. You're joking. I'm not. I chose to live simply. Your father wanted you to grow up grounded, to understand the value of things. So did I. We thought we were teaching you humility. I met his eyes, held them. Instead, you married someone who measures worth by possessions, and you started measuring me the same way. You became exactly what we were trying to protect you from. He sank onto the couch, the one with the broken springs, and put his head in his hands. I don't understand. Why would you hide this? Because we wanted you to build your own life, your own success. We didn't want you to grow up entitled, spoiled, thinking money solved everything. I sat across from him, on the kitchen chair. But somewhere along the way, you learned the opposite lesson. You learned that people without money don't matter. That's not true, isn't it? You stopped inviting me to your parties, stopped calling unless you had to, let Carla treat me like I was some charity project. You were ashamed of me, Richard. Don't deny it. He looked up, and there were tears in his eyes. I wasn't ashamed of you. I was ashamed of myself, of where I came from. Carla's family has money, status, connections. Her father's a surgeon. Her mother's on the boards of 3 museums. And I was just some kid from a modest background. And I wanted to fit in. I wanted them to see me as their equal. So you erased me. I didn't mean to. His voice cracked. I didn't mean to. I handed him the address on a slip of paper. I'm hosting Christmas at my new house. You weren't invited, but your cousins, your aunt, your uncle, they'll all be there. People who never cared whether I had money. People who loved me when they thought I had nothing. He stared at the paper, at the address written in my careful script. I could see him calculating, realizing. 7 Seabreeze Drive. That's the old Whitmore estate. I saw it online when it sold last month. That place went for $7 million. Yes. His hands shook. Jesus Christ, Mom. You should go, I said gently. I have packing to finish. He stood slowly, unsteadily, looked at me like he'd never seen me before, like I was a stranger wearing his mother's face. Can I come? To Christmas? I considered him. The boy I'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, cheered through every milestone. The man who'd looked through me for years because I didn't shine in the right way. That's up to you, sweetheart. But if you come as my son, not as Carla's husband. You come ready to listen, to see, to face what you've become. He nodded, mute, and left. I watched him walk to his car, a luxury sedan that probably cost more than 3 years of my rent here. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, not moving, and I wondered what was going through his mind. Then he started the engine and drove away. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear, the ocean a sheet of silver under the winter sun. I woke up in my new bedroom, in the massive bed with the ocean view, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered. This was mine. This was real. I got up, made coffee in the kitchen that still felt too big, too gleaming, and walked out onto the terrace. The wind was sharp, smelling of salt and freedom. My family started arriving around noon, and their reactions were everything I'd hoped for. Helen was first, pulling up in her minivan with her husband Tom and their 2 teenagers. I opened the door, and she just stood there, frozen, staring. "Maggie," she whispered. "Maggie, what?" "Come in," I said, laughing at her expression. She walked through the foyer like she was in a dream, touching the banister, the walls, the garland. This can't be real. This is... Maggie, how? I hugged her, felt her trembling. It's real, and I'm going to explain everything. My cousin Dow arrived next, with his wife Lynn and their daughter Sophie. Dow walked through the foyer and stopped dead. "Maggie, what did you do? Did you rob a bank?" "Something like that," I said. They kept coming. Cousins, old friends, people I hadn't seen in years but who'd stayed in touch, who'd sent Christmas cards, who'd called when they heard Daniel died. They filled the house with noise and warmth and disbelief. We gathered in the living room, the massive tree glowing, the smell of roasted turkey and garlic drifting from the kitchen. I'd hired a chef, a young man named Marcus who moved through the kitchen like a dancer, but I'd made the stuffing myself, Daniel's old recipe with sausage and sage and apples. People laughed, swapped stories, held their wine glasses like they were afraid to break something. Helen kept touching my arm, as if to make sure I was real. Dow's daughter Sophie took photos, posted them online with captions full of question marks, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. And then, just as we were about to sit for dinner, The doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I opened it. Call it instinct. Call it dread. Richard stood on the porch, Gabriel at his side, both of them dressed too formally in dark suits and ties. Carla lingered behind, her expression tight, unreadable. She was wearing a designer dress, heels, makeup applied with precision. She looked like she was dressed for a battlefield. "Mom," Richard said quietly, "can we come in?" I looked at Gabriel, 9 years old, dark eyes nervous, hopeful, his hair combed carefully to one side. My grandson. I hadn't seen him in 3 months, not since the birthday party where Carla had seated me at the side table. He was holding a small wrapped present, clutching it like a lifeline. "Of course," I said, stepping back. "All of you." The house had gone quiet. Everyone in the living room watched as Richard's family entered, as Carla took in the chandelier, the art on the walls, the sheer impossible scale of it all. I saw her eyes widen, saw the calculation happening behind them. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. Helen stood up, came to my side. She'd never liked Carla, had complained to me more than once about her airs. Now she just watched, silent, protective. "Margaret," Carla said, her voice thin and strange. "I had no idea. We had no idea. This is—" "No," I said. "You didn't." Richard gripped Gabriel's shoulder, his knuckles white. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I told Carla about everything, about what you told me. And we talked, and we needed to come. We needed to see you." I nodded slowly. "I know." We stood there, the silence thick with everything unsaid, years of small cruelties and erasures hanging in the air. Then Gabriel broke free, ran to me, wrapped his arms around my waist. "Grandma," he said, his voice muffled against my sweater. "Grandma, this place is amazing. Dad said you've been rich this whole time and we didn't know. Why didn't you tell us?" I crouched down, looked into his bright, open face, the innocence there, the lack of judgment. "Because I wanted your dad to love me for who I am, not for what I have." He frowned, thinking, "But we do love you. I love you. I know you do, buddy." I touched his hair, soft and familiar. "And I love you too." He handed me the present, eager now. "I got you something." I picked it out myself. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a picture frame, simple wood, with a photo inside. Gabriel and me from 2 years ago at the park, both of us laughing at something. I'd forgotten about this photo, hadn't known it existed. "Gabriel, this is perfect. I wanted you to remember," he said, "that I always liked hanging out with you, even when Mom and Dad didn't invite you over." The room was absolutely silent now. Carla's face crumpled. Richard closed his eyes. "Come on," I said, standing up, taking Gabriel's hand. "Let's eat. We have a lot of people here who want to meet you." Dinner was awkward, but not cruel. I'd seated Richard and Carla at the far end of the long table, surrounded by family who remembered me as I'd always been, generous, kind, present. Helen sat across from them, and I watched her watching Carla, her expression cool and assessing. Dow was next to Richard, and he made small talk, polite but distant. The message was clear. They were here, but on probation. Gabriel sat next to me, chattering happily, piling his plate high with turkey and mashed potatoes. I helped him cut his meat, listened to him talk about school, his friends, a book series he was reading. Normal things, easy things. And slowly, the tension began to ease. Helen told stories about our childhood, about our parents' tiny apartment in Chinatown, the summers we'd spent broke and happy, swimming in public pools and eating popsicles on the fire escape. She talked about how I'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for her college, how I'd never asked for anything in return. Dow talked about the scholarship fund I'd anonymously created for his daughter, how it had covered her entire tuition at Berkeley. "I found out it was you last year," he said, looking at me. "Sophie's financial aid office made a mistake, sent me paperwork with the foundation name. I looked it up. Chen Family Trust. Your maiden name." I smiled. "You weren't supposed to know." "I'm glad I do," he said. "We all should know." One by one, people shared stories. My old college roommate Sarah talked about the time I'd loaned her money to start her business, refused to let her pay me back. My nephew James talked about the Christmas I'd bought him a winter coat when his family couldn't afford one, how I'd pretended I'd bought the wrong size. Slowly, piece by piece, my family painted the truth. I'd been giving quietly for decades, helping without fanfare, showing up without needing credit. Carla listened, her face crumbling incrementally. She picked at her food, didn't eat. Richard barely touched his plate either, just stared down at the table, at the expensive china, the crystal glasses. After dessert, a chocolate torte that Marcus had made, layers of dark richness that melted on the tongue. I invited Gabriel to see the library. His eyes lit up. You have a library? I do. Come on. I led him down the hall, opened the double doors, and watched his reaction. He gasped, a pure sound of wonder, ran to the shelves, craned his neck to see the highest ones. Grandma, this is like the library in Beauty and the Beast. Something like that, I said, laughing. He pulled down a first edition of Where the Wild Things Are, held it like it was made of glass. This is really old. It is. It's yours now. Merry Christmas. His mouth fell open. Really? I can keep it? You can keep it. And any other book in here you want to read. He hugged me again, fierce and tight, and I felt something in my chest unlock. This was why I'd finally stopped hiding. Not for revenge, not to shame Richard, but for this. To be able to give freely, openly, to the people I loved. To stop pretending I had nothing to offer. Richard appeared in the doorway watching us. I could see the grief on his face, the regret. Mom, can we talk? I nodded. Gabriel, why don't you stay here and look around? I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, Grandma. Richard and I walked out to the terrace. The ocean roared below, the air sharp and clean, the sun setting in streaks of orange and purple. We stood at the railing, not touching, and I waited. I don't know what to say, he said finally. Start with the truth. He exhaled, a long, shaky sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep. I became someone I don't recognize. Carla's family has money, status, and I wanted to impress them. I wanted to prove I belonged in their world. And you? He stopped, his voice breaking. You didn't fit the picture I was trying to create, so I erased you. I let Carla treat you like you were less than. I let her seat you at the side table at Thanksgiving. I let her make those comments about your clothes, your car, your apartment, and I said nothing. Yes, I'm ashamed, Mom. I'm so ashamed I can barely look at you. I let the silence sit, let him feel it. Then, shame is easy, Richard. Change is harder. He turned to me, eyes red-rimmed, raw. How do I change this? How do I fix it? You start by asking what kind of man you want Gabriel to become. Do you want him to value people by their wealth, by their appearance, by their social status? Or do you want him to value kindness, integrity, loyalty? Kindness, he whispered. Integrity. All of that. Then show him. Not with words, with actions, with how you treat people, with how you treat me. He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I want to try. I want to be better. I know you do, but wanting isn't enough. You have to actually do the work. I will. I promise. I looked at him, this man who was my son, who carried my blood, my late husband's smile. I'm not going to make this easy for you, Richard. I'm not going to pretend the last few years didn't happen, but I'm also not going to shut the door. Not yet. Thank you, he said. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but it's what I'm willing to give. We stood there as the sun sank into the ocean, painting the sky in shades of fire, and I thought about all the years I'd spent making myself small, all the ways I'd apologized for existing, and I thought about Daniel, about his last words to me. Let yourself be seen. I was trying. God, I was trying. The week between Christmas and New Year's, Richard came to the house every day, sometimes with Gabriel, sometimes alone. We talked, really talked. About Daniel, about the business, about the choices I'd made and why, about the ways wealth had warped his marriage, his priorities, his sense of self, about the man he used to be and the man he'd become. He told me about the early years with Carla, how she'd been different then, warmer, less concerned with appearances. Her family put so much pressure on her, he said one afternoon, sitting in the library while Gabriel played on the beach below, to maintain a certain image, to marry the right kind of person. I think she absorbed all of that, without realizing it, and I let her. I encouraged it even, because I wanted to fit into that world. And now? I asked. Now I see what it cost me, what it cost us. Gabriel asks about you all the time, Mom. He wants to know why we don't see you more, and I haven't had a good answer. So what are you going to tell him? He was quiet for a long moment. The truth, that I made a mistake. that I let other people's opinions matter more than the people I love. Carla came once, sat stiffly in the living room, her hands folded in her lap. She apologized, the words coming out wooden at first, defensive. I never meant to. I didn't realize how it looked, how it felt for you. Didn't you? I asked, not unkindly. She flinched. Maybe I did. Maybe I knew exactly what I was doing and I didn't care because... She stopped, her composure cracking. Because my own mother treated my grandmother the same way. She was an immigrant, didn't speak English well, worked as a seamstress, and my mother was ashamed of her, kept her hidden away, only brought her out for big holidays and then acted like she was doing her a favor. And I watched that. I learned from it. I learned that the way you look matters more than who you are. And now? I asked, echoing what I'd asked Richard. Now I'm in therapy, she said, meeting my eyes. Twice a week, trying to unlearn it all, trying to figure out who I am without all the performance. I didn't forgive her immediately, but I listened, and I told her I'd be watching, waiting to see if the change was real. Gabriel spent more and more time with me, coming over after school, on weekends. We'd walk on the beach, collecting shells and sea glass. We'd sit in the library and read together, his small body curled against mine on the big leather couch. He asked me about Daniel, about my life, about why I'd lived in that small apartment for so long. I wanted to see who people really were, I told him, when they thought I had nothing to give them. He thought about that, his brow furrowed. And did you find out? I did. Some people stayed kind no matter what. Some people didn't, like Dad, he said quietly. Your dad made mistakes, but he's trying to fix them. That matters too. On New Year's Eve, I gathered everyone again, this time including Richard, Carla, and Gabriel. The house was full, every room occupied, voices echoing off the high ceilings. I stood in front of the fireplace, the room full of people I loved, and made an announcement. I'm starting a foundation for elderly people who've been marginalized, isolated, or mistreated by their families. A place where dignity is the baseline, not a luxury. We'll provide housing, legal support, counseling, community, and I'm naming it after Daniel, the Daniel Chen Foundation for Elder Dignity. Helen clapped, tears streaming down her face. Dow stood, started a round of applause that filled the room. Richard stood too, walked to me through the crowd, hugged me hard. Thank you, he said into my shoulder. Thank you for not giving up on me. I didn't do this for you, I said gently, pulling back to look at him. I did it for me, for all the people like me who've been made to feel invisible. But I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're seeing this. Gabriel tugged my sleeve, jumping with excitement. Grandma, can I help with the foundation? Can I volunteer? I crouched down, looked into his bright, open face, this beautiful boy who somehow remained untouched by his parents' worst impulses. Absolutely, buddy. We'll need all the help we can get. You can come with me to site visits. Help us figure out what people need. Yes! He pumped his fist and everyone laughed. Carla approached, hesitant, her designer clothes replaced with jeans and a simple sweater. She looked younger somehow, less armored. Margaret, I know I don't deserve it, but if there's room for me to volunteer, to learn, if you'll let me be part of this, there's room, I said. If you're serious, if you're really ready to do the work. I am, she said, and her voice was steady. I want to be better. For Gabriel. For myself. I believed her. Or at least, I believed she wanted to be serious. Time would tell. It always did. It's spring now, 5 months since that Christmas that changed everything. I still live in the mansion, though it feels less like a statement and more like a home. The rooms have filled with life. Gabriel's artwork on the refrigerator, photos on the mantle, a pair of reading glasses I keep losing in the library. I've opened parts of the house for foundation events, for workshops and support groups, for elderly people who need a place where they're valued. The Daniel Chen Foundation launched in February. We bought a small apartment building downtown, renovated it with accessibility features, hired a staff of social workers and nurses. We offer free legal aid for elder abuse cases, therapy sessions, community meals. Every Wednesday I'm there, talking to residents, listening to their stories. So many of them remind me of myself, people who'd been made invisible, treated like burdens by their own families. There's Mrs. Park, 82, who lived in her daughter's basement for 6 years, rarely allowed upstairs when guests were over. There's Mr. Rodriguez, 75, whose son stole his pension checks and left him in a nursing home that barely fed him. There's Janet, 68, whose family institutionalized her the moment her husband died so they could fight over the inheritance. Their stories break my heart and fuel my anger in equal measure. I make sure each of them knows. You matter. Your dignity is not negotiable. Richard comes to volunteer twice a month. At first it was awkward. He didn't know how to talk to the residents, kept offering solutions instead of just listening. But he's learning. Last week, I watched him sit with Mr. Rodriguez for an hour, just playing chess, letting the old man tell stories about his time in the Navy. When Richard left, his eyes were wet. I never would have given him the time of day before. He said to me, "I would have walked right past him on the street. But now you don't," I said. Now I don't. Carla comes too. Less frequently, but more meaningfully. She leads an art therapy group on Thursday afternoons, helps residents create paintings and collages. She's good at it. Patient, encouraging, present in a way I've never seen her be. One day, she pulled me aside after a session. "My grandmother would have loved this," she said quietly. "She painted, watercolors. But my mother made her stop because it was messy, because it wasn't refined enough. She died without ever picking up a brush again." "I'm sorry," I said. "Me too. I'm sorry for a lot of things." She looked at me, really looked at me. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be different." Gabriel is there every weekend, a bright presence that the residents adore. He reads to Mrs. Park, plays cards with Mr. Rodriguez, helps Janet with her knitting. He started a pen pal program, matching residents with kids at his school, bridging generations. His teacher called to tell me it's made a profound impact on his empathy, his worldview. "He talks about dignity all the time now," she said, "about treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances. That's Daniel's legacy," I thought. And maybe, finally, it's mine too. Richard and I have coffee every week, usually Wednesday mornings before I head to the foundation. We meet at a small cafe near the beach, nothing fancy, and we talk. Sometimes about the foundation, sometimes about Gabriel, sometimes about the past. It's not easy. There are still moments when I see the old Richard surface, the one who cares too much about appearances, who measures success by external markers. But he catches himself now, corrects course. Last month he told me he'd turned down a promotion at work. It would have meant more travel, more time away from Gabriel, from you. And I realized I didn't want it. The money, the title, it's not worth it. "What did Carla say?" I asked. He smiled, a little rueful. "She agreed. She's been pushing me to find more balance. We're both trying to figure out what actually matters. We've started a tradition. Sunday dinners at the mansion, just the 4 of us. Nothing elaborate. Sometimes I cook. Sometimes Richard brings takeout. Sometimes Carla makes a simple pasta. We eat in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, and we talk. Gabriel dominates the conversation, telling us about his week, his friends, his worries. Richard listens in a way he never did before, asks real questions, engages. Carla has stopped checking her phone during meals, stopped worrying about what other people think. One Sunday, as we were cleaning up, Gabriel said, "I like this. I like when we're all together." "Me too, buddy," Richard said, ruffling his hair. And I realized, this is what I'd wanted all along. Not the grand gesture, not the dramatic revelation, but this. Connection, presence, family that sees each other. Helen visits often, sometimes staying for days at a time. She loves the house, loves walking on the beach, loves having space to breathe. Her marriage has been strained. Tom lost his job last year, and the stress has worn them both down. I've offered to help financially, but she refuses. "I need to do this ourselves," she says stubbornly. So instead, I give her a place to rest, to remember who she is outside of worry. We sit on the terrace with wine, watching the waves, talking about everything and nothing. "I'm proud of you," she told me last week, "for finally taking up space, for stopping the apologizing. It's harder than I thought it would be," I admitted. Sometimes I still catch myself shrinking, downplaying. It's such an old habit, but you catch yourself. That's what matters. I've started painting again, something I gave up decades ago when life got busy, when Daniel's illness consumed everything. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into a studio, bought canvases and oils and brushes, I'm terrible at first, rusty and frustrated, but slowly the muscle memory returns. I paint the ocean mostly, the way it looks at different times of day. Slate gray at dawn, turquoise at noon, silver at dusk. I paint the light on the water, the way it fractures and dances. It's meditative, this process of creating something from nothing. It reminds me I'm still capable of making beauty. I joined a book club too, a group of women who meet monthly at the local library. They're a mix of ages, backgrounds, perspectives. When they found out about the foundation, several of them volunteered. Now we don't just discuss books. We discuss elder care, family dynamics, systemic issues. We've started advocating for policy changes at the city level, pushing for better protections for vulnerable seniors. It feels good to channel my experience into something larger than myself. I've made new friends who know exactly who I am and don't flinch. There's Patricia, a retired doctor who lives down the coast. There's Michael, a widower who volunteers at the foundation and shares my love of mystery novels. There's Yuki, who teaches watercolor classes and convinced me to try a different medium. These people see all of me, the wealth, the history, the mistakes, the growth, and they stay. That's a gift I don't take lightly. But the biggest change, the most profound one, is internal. I've learned something I wish I'd understood sooner. True wealth isn't about money. It's about living fully, authentically, without apology. It's about surrounding yourself with people who see you, not your possessions, not your status, but you, the messy, imperfect, resilient soul inside. For years, I thought I was teaching Richard humility by hiding my wealth, but really, I was teaching him that I wasn't enough, that I needed to be smaller, quieter, less, that my value was tied to how little space I occupied. And he absorbed that lesson so completely that he stopped seeing me at all. He saw only the surface, the shabby apartment, the secondhand clothes, and judged it insufficient. But here's what I know now. I am enough, exactly as I am, with the money or without it, with the mansion or with the cramped rental. The external circumstances don't define my worth. They never did. I define my worth. And I've decided I'm valuable. I'm deserving of love, of respect, of space. I'm done apologizing for existing. That doesn't mean I've become someone who flaunts wealth or treats people poorly. I still give generously, still live with intention, still believe in humility. But there's a difference between humility and erasure. Humility means knowing your value and not letting it make you arrogant. Erasure means pretending you have no value at all. I won't do that anymore. Last week, a woman came to the foundation, 70 years old, bent and tired, carrying everything she owned in 2 plastic bags. Her son had kicked her out when she couldn't work anymore, told her she was a burden. She sat in my office and cried, apologized for crying, apologized for taking up my time, and I held her hands, weathered, strong hands that had worked a lifetime, and said, "You don't have to apologize. You belong here. You matter." She looked at me with such surprise, such disbelief, that it broke my heart. "No one said that to me in years," she whispered. "Then let me say it again. You matter. Your life has value. You deserve dignity." She sobbed then, deep wrenching sobs that seemed to come from a place beyond words. And I held her and thought, this is why I stopped hiding. Not for revenge, not to prove anything to Richard or Carla or anyone else, but for this. To be able to look another human being in the eye and say, "I see you. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten." We found her a place in our building, a sunny 1-bedroom with a view of the park. She moved in last Tuesday, and when I visited to check on her, she was standing at the window, just standing there, looking out. "I haven't had a window in 3 years," she said. "I forgot how much I miss the light. These moments, these quiet, profound moments, they're what wealth is really for. Not for impressing people, not for status, but for making space in the world for people who've been pushed to the margins, for restoring dignity to those who've been told they don't deserve it." Richard is learning this too, slowly. He started asking different questions at work, advocating for older employees who get passed over for promotions. He's pushing back when colleagues make dismissive comments about aging or retirement. He's using his privilege, and he has plenty of it, to amplify voices that usually go unheard. It's a start. It's not enough to undo the years of complicity, but it's a start. Gabriel gives me hope. He's growing up with a different framework, a different set of values. He judges people by their kindness, their character, not by their clothes or cars. He asks me questions constantly. Why do some people have so much while others have so little? What can we do about it? How do we make things more fair? And I answer as honestly as I can. Teach him that change happens through consistent, unglamorous work, through showing up, listening, acting. Last month, for his 10th birthday, he asked if we could skip presents and donate the money to the foundation instead. Carla looked stricken. She'd already bought him an expensive gaming system. But Richard supported it. If that's what you want, buddy, then that's what we'll do. Gabriel beamed. I want to help more people like Mrs. Park. She told me she feels at home now. I want other people to feel that way too. Carla cried later. Told me she couldn't believe she'd almost raised a son who'd value things over people. Thank God you intervened, she said. Thank God you didn't let us completely destroy him. You didn't destroy him, I said. You made mistakes, but you're correcting them. That matters. She nodded, but I could see the grief in her face. Grief for the years she'd wasted, the person she'd been. I understood that grief intimately. I carried it too. Sometimes late at night, I stand on the terrace and look at the ocean, and I think about Daniel. I wonder what he'd say if he could see me now. I think he'd be proud. I think he'd laugh at the mansion, shake his head at the opulence, but ultimately understand. This isn't about the house. It's about refusing to disappear. It's about claiming space in a world that tells women, especially older women, that they should fade quietly into the background. I'm not fading. I'm burning brighter than I ever have. The foundation is expanding. We're opening a second location in the next county, and there's talk of going statewide. We've started a podcast, sharing stories from our residents, humanizing issues of elder care and family estrangement. The response has been overwhelming. Thousands of people reaching out, sharing their own experiences, thanking us for speaking truth. It turns out there are a lot of people who've been made invisible. A lot of people who need to hear, you are seen. You matter. I've been interviewed by local news, asked to speak at conferences, invited to consult on policy. It's strange, being visible after so many years of hiding, but it's also liberating. I'm using my voice, my resources, my story, to create change. That's worth more than any amount of money in a bank account. Richard told me recently that he's been reading Daniel's old journals. I gave them to him after Christmas, thought he should know his father better. He wrote about you constantly, Richard said, about how smart you are, how strong, how much he admired your integrity. He was so proud of you, Mom. I know, I said quietly. I felt that every day. I should have been proud of you too. I should have seen what he saw. You see it now. That's what matters. But the truth is, I don't need Richard's pride anymore. I don't need anyone's validation. I know who I am. I know my worth. And that knowledge, that bone-deep certainty, is more valuable than any mansion, any bank account, any external recognition. I am Margaret Chen. I am 69 years old. I have made mistakes and I have learned from them. I have loved deeply and I have grieved deeply. I have been invisible and I have chosen to be seen. I have wealth, and I am using it to create a more compassionate world. I am flawed, and I am enough. I am powerful, and I am humble. I contain multitudes, and I'm not done yet. Not by a long shot. If this story moved you, if it resonated with something in your own life, I hope it reminds you of something crucial. You don't have to shrink to make others comfortable. You don't have to hide your worth, financial, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, to prove you're humble. Real humility is knowing your value and using it to lift others up, not tearing yourself down to make others feel superior. Real wealth is being seen and loved for exactly who you are, in all your complexity. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever dimmed your light to fit someone else's expectations, if you've ever apologized for taking up space, I see you. I was you. And I'm telling you, stop. Life is too short, and you are too valuable. You deserve to live fully, boldly, authentically. You deserve to occupy space without apology. You deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate you, not people who diminish you. It's never too late to choose differently. I was 69 when I finally stopped hiding. 69 when I reclaimed my voice, my space, my dignity. And if I can do it after decades of shrinking, so can you. Whatever your age, whatever your circumstances, you have the power to say, I matter, I am enough. I will not be erased. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's been made to feel small, who's been taught that humility means invisibility, who's forgotten their own worth. And if you found something meaningful here, if this story touched something true in you, then subscribe to this channel. We're building a community here, a space for stories about hidden strength, quiet revolutions, ordinary people doing extraordinary things by simply refusing to disappear. Every story we share is about reclaiming power that was always yours, about the courage it takes to be fully yourself in a world that profits from your silence, about the transformation that happens when you finally stop apologizing for existing. Some truths are worth shouting, some are worth whispering, and some, like this one, are worth living, one brave choice at a time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your own quiet revolution, whatever form it takes. You matter. Never forget that.